So I already touched upon the medication errors and the off-label use this morning. So risk management planning is my other particular field of interest. So I agreed, following the invitation to present here, that I would organize a workshop on the risk management plan. I have to acknowledge some slides that have been prepared by a colleague of mine, Dr. Lambert Kreuwels from Lundbeck. He's the EU QPPV for that company, and I would like to start out with some background on risk management planning and systems, when you need a risk management plan, how to prepare it, special situations, and then the take-home messages. I have a lot of spare slides with practical examples, and I probably won't get around to discussing these, so I've already asked the organizers downstairs if it would be, if they're going to share the slides after the presentation. She said she would ask, so otherwise just send me an email and I'll send you a SlideShare link or something if you would like to look into this in more detail. Risk management background, starting with ICH. They prepared this E2E guidance on pharmacovigilance planning. That's the international ID behind it. In Europe, we used to have volume 9A to describe how we had to write a risk management plan. And now we have the good vigilance practices, of which I'm highlighting the module 5 on risk management systems, the module 16 on risk minimization measures, so I'll touch upon a selection of tools and how to measure effectiveness of those tools. And there's guidance on the format of the risk management plan in the EU, in integrated format, and there's even a separate one if you happen to work in the generic industry. The FDA, I presume Mr. Koski will come back, but there's the guidance for industry on risk maps, risk minimization action plans, GPP and pharmacoepidemiology, and there's a guidance for industry with regards to pre-marketing risk assessment. And then SIOMS already in 1998 has written a benefit risk balance for marketed drugs publication. And finally, last year, they came up with this risk minimization measures, SIOMS 9. I can highly recommend that for reading because it also includes a lot of practical examples on how you should try and minimize risks associated with medicinal product use. The reason why you need a risk management system is that not all risks are apparent when you are doing your clinical program, because your clinical studies may be limited in size and duration, or they might focus more on efficacy rather than deliver a lot of safety data. Subgroups that could be at risk are excluded from your study. And post-marketing, you might have better detection systems or awareness what to look at. And that's why a marketing authorization holder or an applicant for a marketing authorization should have a risk management system in place. A couple of examples where things went wrong. I think you're well aware of these, so I'll just skip them quickly. And then, according to the EU legislation, a risk management system is a set of activities and interventions that are designed to identify, characterize, prevent, or minimize risks. That's what you aim to do with managing them, relating to medicinal products, and here's the tricky part, including assessment of effectiveness of those interventions. It's a continuing process throughout the life cycle of a medicinal product, and in the EU we have this risk management plan template. So visually, you identify your risks, characterize and monitor, see if you can try to minimize them, and then determine if these actions are really giving you the outcome you want. And the idea behind it is that the benefits for a particular drug exceed the risks by the greatest achievable margin. So you need a positive benefit-risk balance. You should need the medicinal product should give you a bigger benefit than risks, and that means that is different for each medicinal product, because the greater the benefit, that means that patients will also accept more risk associated with the use of these products. So that's something that you have to think of when you design a risk management system for a certain product. When do you need to have an EU RMP? We lost quite a few people during the course of the day, but which ones of you you've been writing an EU RMP? Can I see some more hands of people that have been involved in EU RMP writing? And the people for which this is new or outside of your regular day-to-day work? Okay, thank you. So when you submit a new marketing application, and it can be any type, I'll explain that later on, it needs to include a risk management plan. So you have to define, when you provide all your information to the regulatory authorities, asking to be granted a marketing authorization and the right to market a medicinal product, you need to include a risk management plan. And that also includes a summary that's going to be published in the view of the transparency about the safety of the drugs. Also, this includes an application when you have a significant change to an existing marketing authorization. So you want to obtain a new route of administration or a new dosage form, or you want to extend the indication, then you would also again need to submit an RMP for this new change. If a national competent authority asks you for a risk management plan, obviously you can't say, oh yeah, I'm not going to do that, because that wouldn't really work. Or when you have new data that impacts what you previously wrote in your RMP. So if you have final study results, or when you would have a PSUR looking at a certain period and it identifies a safety concern, that may be this one occasion where you would be writing an RMP and a PSUR at the same time, and finally you can use this cross-linking of modules in both the documents. Templates within the EU have changed from an MHRA template in the past to this current guidance on format of the risk management plan. You have to look carefully which one to take, because there's a revision 1, and there's actually some things happening in the world of the good vigilance practices, but I'll touch upon that later. So what do you state in a risk management plan? You have to indicate what you do know and what you do not know about your product, and this is included in the safety specification. So that's the known thing. Then you have to specify, this is what we're going to do to increase our knowledge. This is the plan, the pharmacovigilance plan on how you intend to do so. And then you're defining actions to minimize the risks that you know of or that you think could occur. And these are the risk minimization measures. So these are separate sections in the EU RMP. And they feed into this cycle of identification, characterization, and monitoring, minimization, and measuring effectiveness in this way. If you find Module 5 of the GVP at the EMA website, then it will tell you that you need to include 14 modules in your EU risk management plan, starting with a purely administrative product overview. Then there are additional 5 sections that actually contain data, and then there's part 7, that's the annexes. And that, depending on your product, can be huge or can be almost empty. So to start out with part 2, the safety specification, that's your summary of the safety profile. And this includes in module S1 to S6. These modules are important because they can, whether or not you have to complete them, can depend on the way that you applied for a marketing authorization. So I'll show that later on. And in this section, you identify important adverse events that are possibly related to your drug. These are the risks, and you outline them in modules S7, where you state this is an identified risk or this could be a potential risk. To clarify those, identified risks are those where you have enough evidence. Potential risk is you suspect it, but you haven't really confirmed the association. So these are the ones that generally would require further investigation and at some point might become redundant or could become an identified risk at an update of the RMP. And there's the missing information. So that's data that is not available at the time when you submit the risk management plan. And these 3, so the important identified risks, important potential risk, and this missing information, are referred to as safety concerns. And that's what you describe in your risk management plan. What are the concerns regarding safety that you worry about and that you plan to take action upon? A rule of thumb, when you have your SMPC at the time that you're writing the risk management plan, identified risks, they would all end up in the section on undesirable effects, which is 4.8. That doesn't mean they're important. It's just that they're identified, that this is what we know can occur when you take the drug. And potential risks, they would end up in the warnings and precautions section, but only if they are important to warn for. If you're describing this in a safety specification, you need to present a lot of data on these specific adverse drug reactions that you consider an identified or a potential risk. So you need to know about, would this be serious if it occurred? Seriousness, I mean, in the case of diarrhea, it would probably depend on the opinion of the patient. And if you ask a healthcare professional, like, hey, the patient is going to die, what does diarrhea mean? So that's actually in the eye of the beholder, more or less. The outcome, preventability, so regulatory action taken, if any, that's the kind of information you need in the safety specification. Missing information is, generally populations not studied in the pre-approval phase. So the children, elderly, pregnant ladies, if you have relevant comorbidity or other co-diseases. Genetic polymorphisms is a nice one, especially where you have this more targeted, more and more personalized medicine. And different racial and or ethnic origins that would hamper global applicability. Missing data, again, if you have your SMPC next to you, that would facilitate your RMP writing. When it says is lacking, or we excluded these and these patient groups or subjects, or maybe something may be decreasing or increasing, that's usually missing data. So that's, you don't know if this would really apply, yes or no. The next part is the pharmacovigilance plan, and that's where you describe your actions. And then there's the routine pharmacovigilance, which is what you do on a day-to-day basis if you're in a pharmacovigilance department. So you collect information on adverse drug reactions, and beware if you have targeted questionnaires to follow up on exposure in pregnancies or something, that's considered routine pharmacovigilance. Reporting of cases, continuous monitoring of the safety, this is all routine. As soon as you start additional pharmacovigilance activities because you think routine is not sufficient, then you end up with some kind of study. You can have registries where you are following patients from inclusion to, discontinuation, intensive monitoring, observational, and maybe even interventional studies to further investigate a risk. There's a part on post-authorization efficacy studies, because this was a term invented during the new legislation update. Do we know about, are we missing some information about efficacy in certain target populations? Like, we haven't studied the long-term efficacy of a certain drug. But this is not when you want to see if you could get an extra indication. That's excluded from this part of the risk management plan. The next part is about risk minimization measures. And here we talk again about routine and additional. And it's when you write an RMP for the first time, this is going to be confusing. So routine PV is what you do on a regular basis. Additional PV is when you have to conduct these studies. When you have routine risk minimization, we're talking about we're minimizing risk in the target population by making sure that the legal status of a medicine is in line with the risks. So an OTC product will have less risk associated with it than a prescription drug generally. The product information is a routine risk minimization measure. Pack size limitation could be. So if you want to buy over-the-counter paracetamol, it won't have more than 10 tablets per box. If you buy it at a pharmacy, you can suddenly buy boxes that have 2.5 times the number of tablets. And next to that, you can decide that this routine risk minimization won't be enough and you need additional risk minimization activities. And that means you plan to educate the users, so distribute educational materials. You may try to control the conditions under which a drug may be made available to reduce risk of, for example, misuse or off-label use. So you would determine who is able to prescribe or dispense or receive the drug. You could go for controlled distribution, and you can choose for some other additional risk minimization activities. This could actually already start pre-marketing. There's wording of something called a developmental risk management plan, and that would have applied in your situation. It means that you revise what kind of patients will be included and excluded from the study. It might mean that you plan to revise the informed consent form because you ran into some issues while you were starting your clinical program. And it could mean some guidance documents, amongst others. Post-marketing, risk minimization measures might mean you need to change your label because you noticed it's not being followed or it's not clear enough. Your dosage could be changed. You might need to send out this Dear Doctor letter, Dear Healthcare Professional communication. And educational material might be necessary. And that can be in whole different forms, from slightly expensive to very, very expensive. The evaluation, which is part of risk minimization, this is where the part comes in that you had this great plan about informing everybody on the risks associated with the safe and efficacious use of your product, but you have to measure in how far these have actually been implemented or are working. That also applies to your routine risk minimization measures. So you should probably from spontaneous data, you can see how often a certain instruction in your label is not being followed. If you have additional risk minimization measures that are necessary, then this is guidance from CMS 9, to see if your risk minimization measures are effective, you can verify this on 2 levels. So your outcome, I don't want to have congenital anomalies in female patients that are taking isotretinoin or some other teratogenic drug, could be an outcome indicator. Question if it's feasible. Process indicators are more like your metrics. So that means I have an oncology drug that has some educational material, so I will send my educational material when my product is launched or before my product is launched. It's all planning to all the oncologists in my territory. Usually, when you would have a centrally authorized product, that means you have to involve your local staff and make sure that the implementation plan in the local territories has been discussed and is in line with your global company's view. And that means you also have to track. So you have to see, okay, I sent this out on day this and this, and I did a survey after 6 months to see how many of or 3 months, how many of the oncology specialists have actually received my educational material. And this is the kind of thing that you have to track. And also the process indicators are generally feasible. The outcome indicators are really the ones you have to decide beforehand. Is this feasible? Is it feasible that if you would have 1 million young ladies that could potentially become a mother, that none of them would have a congenital anomaly? Would that be a feasible outcome if 1 in every 1,000 pregnancies has some kind of congenital anomaly? It wouldn't be a feasible outcome. So you have to think beforehand, what is feasible, what can I achieve? And then you have to also decide how are you going to measure that, from spontaneous reporting only, or will you do a drug utilization study to see how often that occurs? So it means that you need to have some background information and knowledge about your product and the patients that are using it. The summary of all these activities that you're describing in a risk management plan will become public. And this is a part that the industry is disliking, because it means that you have to start copying information from other sections in the risk management plan to this summary to present as a summary table of safety concerns. You presented that earlier in your part 2. Your table of ongoing planned PV studies and activities, this is in your pharmacovigilance plan, and you're copying it again to your summary. Your post-authorization efficacy plan, if any, that's from your other part, you put it there, and then the summary again of your risk minimization measures. So this is when people complain about duplication of information in the risk management plan, this is where it comes from. You have to summarize data that's actually in tables already above, but that's because this part forms the elements for a public summary that will be published somewhere as a standalone document. And that needs to be in lay language because it's intended for the patients that are going to use this drug. So it, again, is going to provide an overview of disease epidemiology. And it should be brief. The guidance states that you cannot use more than so many words per indication. Lucky you if you had this drug X from this morning that had 20 indications. It gives you a lot of room to make a very large risk management plan. It should provide a summary of treatment benefits, unknowns relating to treatment benefits. It should present the safety concerns, so the identified potential risks and the missing information. Summary of what you plan to go and do, if any, a planned post-authorization development plan. Studies which are a condition of the marketing authorization. In Europe, it's possible that a regulatory body tells you, we will not grant you your marketing authorization unless you do a drug utilization study for this product in the... That's what we mean when it says a condition of the marketing authorization. And you have to show a summary of changes to the risk management plan over time. Now, when is this RMP updated? I hinted on the annexes in part 7. I will leave this to you to read up later on. Specific content requirements. You can choose in the EU under what kind of article of the Directive 2001 on medicinal drugs you want to submit your product on, and that defines whether or not you have to complete certain modules. So when you're developing a new active substance, this is 8.3, you have to write the whole risk management plan, and then you would easily get to 60 pages. But let's say, for example, you're at Dr. Reddy's and you make a generic medicine, then you can omit like half of the information that would be referring to the reference medicinal drug or to the innovator. So you would just say, hey, I did a bioequivalent study and I'm bioequivalent, so I'm referring to the clinical trial data of the innovator. Then your RMP can be 15 pages. And then you're done quite quickly, but you still need to do the repetitive thing in the summary in part 6. So depending on what kind of application you have, and I've added the articles for your use, you might find it very convenient. When you ask for the legal basis of a product, when you have to write a risk management plan, this is the legal basis, and that's what it means, and these are the modules that you would need to complete. So how to prepare a risk management plan? You have to follow the SOP or procedure from your company. So you need an SOP in your company to write a risk management plan, and you have to use the EU RMP template, because if you don't, you'll get comments during the submission period. Things are changing here. So there's a draft GVP Module 5 that will, Q4 of this year, autumn of this year, will be open for consultation. And this was again shared on this RMP Information Day in June last year. And they will have replaced tables with more detailed description on how you have to complete an RMP. If you're a generic, then there's now data on the CMDH website, so for mutual and decentralized procedures, that will actually show you lists with these are the identified and potential risks and missing information. So I invite you to go and have a look at what's known for a certain set of medicinal products up until now. It addresses and specifies further all these different MAA types that I showed you in the table before. It will give you some more detailed guidance on requirements for parts and modules, what is needed when. So this table will be out and there will be a more detailed description. And the module S7 will be more reshaped into, I think, what we're already doing, but now it's more specified, that if you decide to include a safety concern in an initial RMP, you have to provide a rationale for it. Why do you think this is a safety concern? If you provide an updated RMP, then you also need to update the safety concern. So that might be the moment when you think that a potential risk is now an identified risk, because you have enough data to prove this causal association. And also you need to provide more details of important identified potential risks and missing information. In practice, and this depends on the company, if you're a large company, you need a team with a relevant representation of departments, because you would need info from clinical staff or safety or marketing. You have to decide who will be the leader, and often for practical reasons that would be pharmacovigilance, but in the Netherlands we have this platform for PV, and we did a survey there, and like half of the people there said that's our regulatory affairs department that takes care of this, they're taking the lead. So that depends on the company. What Peter also said is where you would discuss and agree within the team what are the safety concerns, and if there are any actions necessary to address those. And you need to start well in advance. So if you're a big enough company, your safety department would come up with a safety profile and risks. Your regulatory would inform you about the legal basis, so what regulatory procedure would be followed, and what is your deadline, when is the plan submission, would be nice to know. The clinical team would provide you with the study information. You would need a clinical trial report, and you would need therapeutic area expertise to feed into the benefit section in the RMP. Biometrics can be an extension of the clinical team. Communications, if you have a department like that, and otherwise you can find some CRO or some other company that can help you with proofreading lay language. Toxicology would write a chapter on non-clinical information or in vitro info. And marketing is quite important if you have that in your team. to get a sample of the product. So you would then see, for example, with these insulin pens, hey, but they have the same, this is not clear if you're blind or there are some other reasons. If you're blind, it would be tough anyway. Marketing strategy, to know how you are, if you know the marketing strategy, then you know when you have to inform the relevant prescribers out there. You would need a medical writer to write up the parts. You might have some assistance layout. Medical affairs for liability and efficacy input, and an epidemiologist that could feed into parts of the RMP that have to do with background incidents and epidemiological data on. So this is in when you're like a massive company, because we write risk management plans. We do that with 2 people. So for generic drugs. Other practical issues related to writing an RMP is that you need to align the documents with the expectedness table and the labeling information, with the investigator's brochure, with the reference safety information out there. And for the lay language section, I would advise to look at the patient information leaflet or package leaflet to be able to write in lay language, because if you're a safety professional, you tend to get so mixed up in medical terms that it might not always be very clear to a patient user. Updates of the RMP, so that's now on a risk-based approach, and that's going further and further, so we don't have specified timelines anymore, but when there's a certain risk identified. Versioning is per part, so that means that if you have an RMP version 4, you could still have parts in there that still are version 2, so versioning might differ between the different modules of the RMP. And when you submit it, you have to send it in a single PDF file, so you would have all these different versions of the modules, but still in one PDF file in an easy-to-D sequence, because that's now the way to submit EU RMPs. If you have requests from competent authorities from other countries that want to change your content, then it's best that you have a core risk management plan that contains the data that you feel should be in there. And then you can have region-specific versions. Well, this country wanted this risk also included, so we have a region-specific appendix or a country-specific annex for, in this example, Canada. The special situations I'm describing is where a product might be already on the market before an RMP is needed. That's when you can really you can take the SMPC and try to find some older data, but the SMPC at that time would be leading on what should be in the risk management plan. And you can align this RMP with the last PSUR that you wrote and see if that still applies for your current RMP, to follow up with Giovanni's comment. So my take-home messages are that the EU RMP has a modular structure and that the content would be different for different application types, and that will not change. I heard a lot of complaints at the European Generics Association of generic companies that felt totally overwhelmed with all this duplication. Too bad. Even if the innovator drug doesn't have any additional risk minimization measures, you still need to write an RMP. And it allows overlap with other reports that has been discussed. It's required for each and every new MA application. And when additional risk minimization measures come in, because you have to measure the effectiveness, you have to define beforehand whether or not your outcomes are feasible. And the bigger the company, the more people are involved. So that's the earlier you have to start to get the data from all these different stakeholders. Yeah, so thank you for your attention. And I apologize if I was a bit fast, but I had so many slides.
I know you mentioned that there's overlap between the RMP and the PSUR. How much overlap should there really be aside from just identification of the risk? Because sometimes you have to keep the 2 documents separate because each of them could have different versions. So you don't want to create any inconsistencies, as that's when you're referring to, data that's in the RMP that might become obsoleted as you write the PSUR. So my question is, how much overlap is sufficient?
The original idea behind having modules to overlap is that when you write a risk management plan, it's at the moment that you apply for a market, that's when you write or at least should have your first RMP in place, especially with the new legislation. And it's a forward-looking document. So at the time of obtaining your MA, you have a certain benefit risk balance and you have a certain set of safety concerns. Then your PSUR is looking backwards. So it's over a certain report period, so 6 months in the first year. You're going to see, okay, this was what I had in the RMP at the beginning, so these modules 16 to 18. I will put the same information in my PSUR, but I'm going to look backwards and see if it still applies. So that's the overlap. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same information, but it's the same sections. And with each PSUR, you would update that. And if there's a significant update, then it means you also have to go back to your risk management plan and then in these same sections give the current status of events.
The overlap in the PSUR, DSUR, or PSUR or PBRA specifically is all those sections where you've got important identified risks, important potential risks, and missing information. Those are specific discussion points within all your aggregate reports. So you have to call them out separately.
Yeah.
So, as you know, if you've got 15 identified risks, that means you have 15 separate topics to discuss in each of your reports. So it really is important to pick only those which are
really important. Yeah.
Which was something that is really is paramount. And interestingly, when you talk about the difficulty in measuring your additional risk minimization measures, and primarily that's one of the reasons where the project that I'm working on at the moment is moving away from that. Is to try and do it without additional minimization measures, because it is so difficult to measure that outcome-based measure, because we don't have baseline data.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about congenital anomalies in a patient group. Well, what is the background incidence of that, and how do you even begin? So it's really quite difficult. But yeah, it's a nightmare when you've put something in place. And the company that I've had the privilege of working with a company that's massive and has all those people involved. It's beneficial because you've got input from so many different people, but it's a nightmare because you've got so many different people to adapt to. And I've also been in a situation where there's been one person writing for me. And you think that to write an RMP for a product which has been on the market for 20 years is easy. It's harder to do it for a product that's been on the market for 15, 20 years, especially if it's, for example, an over-the-counter product, where, in my opinion, the regulations were not really designed, the concept of risk management plan was not really designed for an over-the-counter product, which had been in place for 15 years. So to try and go back to look at clinical data is a nightmare. To go back and try and find epidemiology. I mean, where do you start with the epidemiology of pain?
Yeah.
You know, it's a nightmare. So it really is, your 60-page template is a big ask. But to reiterate what you were saying about moving forward and looking at, the rationale for including things, it may not be legislation yet, but in this initial MAA we've put forward, we've obviously got a bunch of risks which will be there, and including in that is the rationale for why they've been included.
Yeah.
Conversely, we have to then look at why we haven't included something and be able to answer that question. But sometimes you write something and then the person who's reviewing says, well, why have you got this as a risk? Doesn't make sense to me. And then you realize, well, I've gotten that data, so I need to put it in. But in writing an initial RMP, it's a big task. And from the experience I've had in this last one, it starts really early on in the development of a sort of core risk log, which then feeds into your RMP, but also into your IB and your DSUR. So, because in the DSUR you have to have your summary of important risks, which essentially you can take directly from the RMP.
Exactly.
So there are some overlaps, but it's very, very...
It's tricky. Yeah. And then when you think you did a good job and you're submitting it to different countries, then you get this country saying, why did you include that risk? And this country saying, you should take that out. Or you should add this one. And you would get different feedback from different authorities, and that's even more challenging.
I've had a similar experience with that with ibuprofen. The B-Farm came back and wanted they wanted 2-3 things included, and the MHRA said, no, take those out, put all the others in.
Yeah.
You almost want to say, well, you two talk together, come to an agreement, and they let us know. But at that point, it wasn't a centralized procedure. You know, there were DCP, so it's.
For those instances, the CNDH has been working. No, not this CDM. No, CNDH is working on this website where they have the list of risks that have been assessed and already approved. So if you stick to that, then you're kind of okay, and at least you can push back when somebody says you need to add or you need to remove. So thank you very much. I think we'll move on to